going through. So if for any reason that stops showing up properly, just let me know. We did start with Legal Server as kind of our case management system just over a year ago now. And one of the things that we had constantly been struggling with our prior case management system was not having access to the data. So we would have a consultant be able to like set up some SQL queries for us and then get kind of summary information, but not really the level of granularity that we needed to use that for any kind of practical purpose other than just kind of very high level cleanup at the end of the year. So moving to Legal Server, one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was starting to get into our data, starting to get it more accessible to myself and also to then other managers and other folks that weren't necessarily going in and writing reports, but could use the information for whatever purpose they had. And as we started doing that, immediately it became clear that as soon as you showed someone one report, they would want to know something else and then something else. And one of the things that I love using Power BI for is it allows you to present information in a more dense way and to kind of cross-reference it in ways that are not easy to do within kind of Legal Server itself. So you can see right here, this is a kind of generic data set that I have based on our actual data, but not exactly. And one of the things you'll see already is that there's a chart here that's cases and a chart that's clients. And these are connected. So if I say I want to see only housing cases, it's going to change the clients chart and allow me to see, how many of these cases were for a specific race of client. It also allows me to break out, again, kind of case counts and client counts. So you can see when I hover over this chart, I get a tooltip telling me how many clients and how many cases. And so that, again, is something that we immediately recognize the need for to be able to do more things by client and not just by case. And having the ability to do that in an interactive way has really been beneficial for us. And because this is a tech call, the way that we did this was either exporting this data to Excel or directly connecting it to Power BI through the Reports API, and then splitting out the tables, splitting out that report into two tables, so cases and then clients, and then relating those on the client ID. Granted, this is only as good as that data is clean, and so I spend more time than I expected cleaning that up, but it does work. And so if I go into actually the data set again, this is pulling from an Excel file, but it looks very similar when you pull it from a report in Legal Server. Again, this is not actual clients. But what happens is you get in a single table. So if you look at this first table that I'm pulling in, this probably, like, the data should look familiar if you've run reports in Legal Server. So I've got kind of some different IDs, office, program, intake type, etc. And then I also have, if I scroll over further, some client information. So a number of minors, age, citizenship status, language, all of that. And so what we ended up doing was just importing one report with all this information. And then what you can do is just either duplicate or reference this table. So I want to say I actually now want another table of that same data. But what I ended up doing was just then removing in the cases table all of the things that are actually not specific to a case. So you can see once I've finished all my transformations, the cases is just case information. There's no demographics. And then same exact report, it's pulling from the same data set. Clients is just the demographics. And then one of the steps you'll notice over here, if you've used Power BI, this will be really, it should be pretty straightforward. If you haven't, one of the steps that we did in the clients table was remove duplicates based on that client ID. So what that's going to end up doing is giving me just the list of deduplicated clients. And so then I can relate them to all of their cases and get kind of that difference of like how many clients did you have versus how many cases. And again, that's something that's not super straightforward to see all in one place in Legal Server, but you can get the information, and then Power BI is really, I feel like, pretty user friendly to reshape that and visualize it in ways that get you what you're looking for, without having to like constantly go back and collapse everything down in the reports. So if I go back to kind of the visual side of this, you can see I've got a bunch of different filters that I can use. And Power BI lets you kind of configure the interactions between pieces of your reports in however ways you want. So you can put slicers on here that says I only want to see our families program, and does this in real time, right? So if you're connecting by API, by the reports API, this can happen. However frequently that refreshes. I typically do it once a week. I don't like doing it more often than that, just for my own sake. But you can set that to refresh and give you recent data. And again, you can kind of fiddle around with this and do more of the data exploration that I find really interesting. So again, you don't have to know what you're looking for ahead of time. You can kind of set up some broad parameters and then go and poke around and see what you find, which I personally really enjoy. Again, you could come up here and say, I only want to see for our Hispanic population, what do we do? And you can see that's lots of housing benefits. For our Black population, similar, but we've got some changes over here in the problem categories. And so again, like if I were to do this in Legal Server, this would be a lot of math to get these numbers and be able to report on them easily. Another really cool thing that you can do, and this is not exclusive to Power BI by any stretch, is that if I wanted to, for example, actually see this data, I can right click and just say, show me this as a table. And so then I get the actual numbers. So if I need to put this into a report somewhere, I don't have to like, again, do math. I promise I didn't do Power BI just to avoid math, but it's useful for that. And so you can kind of see everything that's going on, and do it really at a again, without having to necessarily know ahead of time what you were looking for. You can go in and find really important information for program decisions, or just really persuasive numbers for kind of external communications. And so this is where we started to really play with this. Depending on your Microsoft license, you can publish these presentations or these reports online. And once you do that, you can either share that link with folks in your organization with the viewing license, or you can embed it in a website or portal, again, for folks with a viewing license to see. Power BI is not really set up for external facing things unless you pay Microsoft a lot of money. They like to take all of your money. So again, some really, I like making things colorful and pretty, and I think it helps people to kind of get engaged and play with things more. The other kind of, besides just separating out clients and cases, the other thing that we've done within Power BI is actually separate out, pull in a second report. So we've got a kind of case overview report that has all of the case information and client demographics. And then we have a separate report in Legal Server that is just staff assignments. So you can see in this panel here, kind of the fields that are on that report in Legal Server. And what we used this to do was to actually give our staff the ability to see reports based on the cases that they were assigned to. And so if I go over to where I've got this in Legal Server, I'll walk back of how we got it to here. But we've got a cases view. We're using the cases tab rather than the home tab just to keep this out of the way for now. We've got a view in the cases tab that is just our review dashboard. And then we have we've got the iframe block that we've got the URL from the Power BI online report. And what this does is it pulls in all that information that I was just showing you directly into Legal Server. So people don't have to go find it. They don't have to kind of leave the places that they're used to being to find information about cases or whatever. And because this report is actually based on um, that model that I showed you with the assignments, we actually have the ability here to drop down by specific advocate and see just that person's cases. This report was actually designed to show staff their impact, so it's easy to kind of get in kind of the mode of doing the work and not really kind of getting the big picture of what you've really done over time, both for kind of personal satisfaction and for annual reviews and that kind of thing. So that's why we put this particular report together. We have an advocate, like a user named client intake. That's why this is here. I'm not going to drop that down because we've got other staff in there. But again, you can come in here and any of these pieces or these graphs are going to interact with each other. So if I wanted to say I want to see all of my cases where I'm the primary assignment, and I want to see my clients that are in Santa Monica. That's immediately going to change everything else, and it's going to give me that picture of, what have I been doing for folks in Santa Monica. If you're someone who works heavily with veterans, you want to see how maybe do my veteran clients differ from the rest of my cases. You can do that as well, and you can see again that because of the way everything kind of cross-references and filters, you're getting a lot of information at once without having to run, again, like 50 different reports. So the way that, again, we got this into Legal Server was if we've got a report in Power BI in the desktop, which is where most of the more advanced building happens, we can then go and say, I want to publish this on to the Power BI online platform. Again, this is going to be internal by default. You're not sharing this externally necessarily. And so I'm going to just put it on my workspace. I've been playing with this, so I've already got one, but we'll just write over it. And then I'll get a link to that report on the web service. So when I open that up, it's going to look very similar in the browser versus on the online or versus the local Power BI application. And I can either just share this directly, which if you're only sharing it with a couple of folks, it's great. Or you can say, I want to embed this report into a website or portal. And this gives you a handy dandy little link right here, which if you copy, goes directly into the iframe web part or block and legal server. So if I come back in here, I say I want to look at this specific tab block, I'm going to add that iframe, and then I'm going to put in that URL. I always change the size because that's tiny. And that's it. That's the entirety of getting it from Power BI into Legal Server. This part's the easy part, figuring out what you want on the report, figuring out how to set it up, how to make sure that it's got all the fields you want, making sure that API connection is doing what you want. That's the part that takes a while. But then once you get it to that point, you want to show it off. And this is I think, really useful way to do that. Again, just putting it where people already are. One of the things that you can also do that I did with the staff review dashboard here is because we have that assignments table here, we actually pulled in also the advocate email. And in Power BI, you can set up security based on particular fields and user roles. And so what we did for this one was to actually say for staff members, you can only see assignments where your where the email address in that table, this advocate email, matches the user principal name, which is the Microsoft kind of email address essentially, usually on the Azure sign-in side. And so this means that when staff view that report, they can see all cases for all of LAFLA, or they can see their own, but they can't go in and poke through everyone else's, which we felt was really important to just kind of make sure that folks are focusing on the data that is important for them and important for their roles, and not getting too distracted by what other folks are doing. Again, like it's legal server, they could probably find it if they were looking for it, but it would take a lot more work to do than just kind of coming in here and saying, I want to see all of X person's cases. So we haven't done a lot with the role assignments beyond this. Once you set it up in once you kind of set up these roles in Power BI Desktop, you then go into Power BI Online and assign specific people or user groups to those roles. So if I come back to this kind of online version, and I would go into, I'm gonna forget where it is now that I'm talking through it. But you would go in and be able to change who is being assigned to what user groups in Power BI Online, based on if you've got, again, like if you're using Microsoft, which I'm assuming most people that would be using Power BI are, then you would be able to use any of your security groups, any of your SharePoint groups, or obviously any individuals to assign those roles that you defined in Power BI Desktop. So I've now just been kind of talking for quite a while. Michael or Michelle, is there any questions you had, anything specific that you would want me to walk through? We're still in the kind of initial stages of figuring out how to make this part of our regular kind of program management and assessment. Right now, the only real place that we're using that is the staff impact report for the annual kind of annual reviews, and being able to see what's going on. So are we using single sign-on with legal server, and is that how it filters? So no, it's got a separate separate authentication process. So if I wasn't logged in to the first time that I pull this up, it's going to prompt me to log in. So if I go back to, I think this is going to work. So let me just go back. No, that's not going to work. So basically, none of the sign-in with legal server, regardless of whether it's single sign-on or whether it is the legal server sign-on, is going to interact with this. It's going to have its own separate authentication process. But that said, if you do use single sign-on to log in, when you pull this up and you click on the sign in or authenticate, it's going to immediately recognize you and sign you in without having to type in that password again. So the first time that people see it, they're like, oh no, nothing's there. But then you get them to click the one button and they're fine. So yeah, it's going to be your Microsoft authentication regardless.
Susan, I was wondering how your deduplication by client worked, where you said you did it by client ID. And I'm wondering, because we've seen this certainly not rarely, but client in the same client, two different cases may report a different race.
Yep.
Or they may say Hispanic ethnicity in one, but not in another. If it's deduplicating strictly by client ID, how is that preferencing or picking one or the other where their client's not the same?
Yeah. We decided that we didn't care. And so I do not know kind of behind the scenes what it is, sorting on. I'm imagining it's doing some basic, like if one of these is null and the other one is filled out, like use the one that's filled out. But we have not gone in to do any kind of more advanced figuring out of how to do that other than just say like strictly deduplicate. If we were using kind of smaller data sets, or if we were using this for like specific grant reporting, that would be something that I would want to look into. But since we've been mostly doing kind of big picture program stuff, it hasn't been a point of concern yet. But have definitely thought about it. Because again, just telling Power BI to say, hey, take out all the duplicates without any additional control. Yeah, not a lot of fine tuning with them.
Actually,
The
I
other
have
thing
a
you
second.
can do is because the way that I have it set up in mine right now is to never show any of the demographics or like address information in the cases and only show it in clients. You could show it both places, and that way you would have the option to choose which filter you wanted to use depending on kind of how concerned you were about that level of detail. So
I say then I had a other question about what licensing for Power BI you all are using. And particularly, I was surprised to see that it worked with embedding the iframe. And because I would have assumed that Microsoft would somehow say, why is legal server asking for this? You don't have a user license. Like,
Yep.
how is that? How are you able to view it through legal server?
Yeah. So we have just the pretty. I don't think we have any additional permissions beyond what comes with the E5 licenses. So we've got E5s for everyone. Power BI, if you're doing something in what they consider to be an internal portal, is a lot more generous. They don't really check and see like, are we sure that legal server is in fact internal? They're not really looking for that. What they are looking for is, again, when that iframe initially loads, it'll say like, you have to authenticate, you have to sign in. And when you do, again, you're doing that with your internal credentials, and then it pops up. But yeah, that's the reason I hadn't tried it before, was I was like, I don't think this is going to work. And then I tried it and it worked. So can't complain.
So sorry, I may have missed this, but it just pops up with a request to log in the iframe itself?
Yeah, within the iframe itself, you'll see a, let me see if I can clear my, if I can log myself out. Okay, so if I come back here, again, this single sign-on is not going to interact with that iframe at all, but I'm going to use it just because I can. And of course, I can't. Okay. So this is just getting me then into legal server. When I then get over to the review dashboard, it should give me it'll give me this page right here. And so until I then click again on sign in, nothing is showing. So if I were to embed this iframe on an external web page, you'd see this, right? So unless someone were to log in, they wouldn't be able to see it. And so I think that's kind of where that licensing differs, is they assume that, as long as only internal folks with a sign in are looking at it, then it's an internal use. So once I then click sign in, because I have already authenticated in this browser, it just pops me right over, and then we're there.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to see what flavor of Office we actually have. I'm fairly sure it's not E5, but we'll find out.
Yeah, when we first started playing with this, I was looking at like, how much would it cost to put this on something more external, and it's like, oh, that's a lot. not something we want to do.
So E5, I think, is the one that lets you download copies of the desktop apps and use those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which we use a lot. Again, that's where you get kind of more of this ability to set up different kinds of roles and relationships. That's not something you can configure on the web-based version, at least not easily. It also gives you Power Automate Desktop, which again, not we haven't used this in conjunction with Power BI at all, but this is a really robust kind of, I don't want to just say automation again, but like automation tool. And because you can see over here on the left, we've only ever used this for essentially browser automation. So you can kind of read in this one. Let me kind of clean up my background so it's easier to read. Yeah, I know. You can kind of see that with what we're doing with this one is we're bringing up an Excel file. In this case, it's an Excel file with the case database ID, the case docket number, the courthouse for that docket number, and then a column created from the case database ID with the link to our action to update the case information. So it's got kind of those four columns of data in Excel. And what this is doing is read from that worksheet, pull all that data into the automation, open a new Firefox window, window, with that particular link for that case, going in to edit the court information, plop in that docket number, set the court, save it, close it, and then repeat for all of the things in this Excel sheet. And we were doing this because we realized that a lot of our staff had been kind of historically putting case numbers into the case title field and not into the actual docket number field, which is where we wanted it. So we pulled that number out, we pulled that data out of Legal Server, cleaned it up, put it into a nicely formatted Excel sheet, and then used this to set all of those. I think we've done like 4,000 of these over the last like month or so to clean those up. Not something that you need to do if you're not going to use it, but we're thinking about using this for some other things. So this is another tool that you would get like with those kind of downloadable Microsoft tools. But you can see that it's not just the UI automation, it's got like all of the things that we have not had any particular need for, but I can imagine also being really, really powerful.
So yeah, we've used, I have the Power Automate and Power BI license, but I think I'm the only one with them. And yeah, Power Automate is very helpful. We have various email automations running, but it's a useful thing.
Do you have them running like scheduled, or are you going through and
they're scheduled?
It? Yeah, that's our next stop.
So Dave, what level of 365 are you at? Are you at E3, E5, or what to get that licensing?
I don't actually know. I'm we have a separate IT provider who buys the licenses. I'm not sure exactly what kind of license I have.
And Susan, you said you were E5s, and E5 gives you the power, or the Power BI license, correct?
Yes.
We just don't know what it down levels to.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
David, I'm going to post in chat what Microsoft says about how to check which kind of license you've got. And it looks like you can just do that from your account. You don't have to go digging for it if you're willing to spend a moment or two checking. But I know we played around at Legal Server with Power Automate, but basically just with our SharePoint integration. Right, I've got some directions on our help site about tying the Power Automate into the SharePoint integration to automatically create subfolders when a case folder is created, or to convert a file from RTF to .doc, right? Because there are Power Automate scripts that will do either one of those.
And Michael, is that using the web-based version, or is it using a local?
Web-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I ran into like one fun issue where I was like, create a folder. When the folder is created, create a new folder within that folder. And so that ended up being a little recursive. And
Yep.
after I think 10 levels of like a document subfolder, I realized what was going on. So like there are ways to say like, hey, only do it for this kind of file, right? Or only do it for a folder in the top level folders, right? So that it wasn't happening half a dozen times, but it also meant that it would also be pretty easy to do subfolders within subfolders if you needed to automate that. So.
Yeah, we have a lot of the kind of web-based automation for like other things that are outside of Legal Server. So we have our entire kind of staff scheduling app, like who's in the office when, built on SharePoint and Power Automate and Power Apps. We have like how are people getting, like who's coming to the office as far as like clients. We're using like a form that then triggers like a bunch of other stuff to keep track of. But we haven't yet, again, I think a lot of it because of the Microsoft licensing around APIs, haven't gotten a lot of direct tie-in to Legal Server over there.
Did you have issues creating the reports in Legal Server, or did you find that any issues working with the reports API?
I mean, Power BI is temperamental with them sometimes, as far as whether it will read a data in a report as being within kind of the same table, or like each column as being a different table. And so having to kind of go in and expand everything out and name everything the way that you want it. It's just a lot of time at the front end, but once you get it set, so long as it's what you want, I haven't had any trouble with it kind of, refreshing and staying put and staying working the way we want.
So to answer your question, Michael, we have Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which doesn't sound like it's the same as E3 or E5, unless those translate to something more descriptive. But it appears to include Power Automate, but not explicitly Power BI, because as that is listed under a separate license column. So,
Susan, I have a question.
Yeah, the business levels are different than the E3, E5 levels, and I remember looking at this, and I think it has to do with the maximum number of users and some other licensing schema from Microsoft. But I don't remember the equivalencies. But thanks for checking. So, other questions for Susan?
I was wondering, how are you reading off the data? Is it from like a static file, or are you reading it straight off the Legal Server database?
Yeah, so for the one I've got up right now, because I needed to clean it, and I didn't want to clean our entire database, this is from an Excel file. But the ones that we actually embed for staff to use is coming from that reports API in Legal Server, and then it's getting refreshed every week. So that's all coming live, or live-ish, from Legal Server.
Okay, so you can connect Power BI to the Legal Server API, and you can just decide what you want to pull from it.
Yeah. So if I go into Power BI again, and I'm going to come and get data. There's this like web option here, and this is where you would put the link from the reports API that you get. Once you get that, you would enter your login information for whatever your API user is, and then after a lot of cleanup, as far as again like making sure that all of the data is showing up correctly as you know, actual information and not random tables, then it comes through. So this right here is actually really like powerful, and I think it's really underdocumented. But it's really easy to use once you've done it a few times, and there's not any additional software needed to get that set up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it really is like just shockingly easy. I feel like people were so impressed until I showed them how to do it, and they were like, "That's it."
Oh,
I was like, "No, the hard part is building it in Power BI. That's what takes forever."
Yep.
Yeah, but connecting it to Legal Server, they've made that super easy.
Mm-hmm.
On that, you mentioned one of the really challenging parts is kind of where a program meets data and like getting people to decide what should be displayed. Do you have any advice on like how, as data and tech people or lessons learned, how we can lead those or prompt those conversations, like how to get that going and actually decide on those data?
Yeah. I always feel like for me, because now that I'm in this role of like being the person that people come to ask for data, I always try to show people like one more thing than they asked for. So if you asked for like, you know, this particular number for the grant, I would show it to you and be like, oh, this is how it compares to your, you know, work group overall. Or this is, you know, within your work group who's like contributing the most to this. Or even things like, you know, when I pulled this up and I was showing the client intake cases, there were a couple that was like, they were assigned as a reviewing attorney on one, and that's not right. And so letting people kind of see where the data is not clean, because everyone kind of assumes that it's working until they're shown that it's not, and it's yeah. So letting people see, right, like the data as it is, and then having them be like, well, why is that like that, is really useful. And I think part of it is just time. I started kind of nudging a lot of our staff in this direction a while back, and felt like it was getting nowhere. And then suddenly, like, you get to a tipping point where people are like, wait a minute, it's like we're trying to figure out how many of this type of case we're going to see next year. It might be useful to know how many we saw last year, and you know, kind of going from there. And starting small like that's always my hard thing, is like I want to start with this, like I want to start with this and more, but giving people like very basic, like just this, right, like how are people accessing us, like, and getting this kind of on someone's homepage, or you know, making it a part of conversations. Like when I was managing intake, like bringing this up every month or so to be like, here's how it changed, here's like, you know, you may have felt like we were seeing more online intakes, here's the actual number, like you were right, like it was in fact more. So that kind of thing is helpful. And then if you can, to the extent that you can find like even small buy-in from people at like senior management or director level, they don't have to be the ones that are spending all of their time on this, but if you can get even just a little bit of excitement from folks, then I think that goes so far to everyone else kind of recognizing that it's important, and something that's expected, that they will be looking at data when they're doing their work, and especially when they're making any kind of program decisions.
Yeah, I remember before I came to Legal Server, I would often be asked by the executive director at the time, like, what is this show us, right? Like, what's the data, right? And it always ends up being that whole thing about, and I think what you said, Susan, was really important. But show them what they asked for, but then also show them like the tweak beyond what they asked for, because they don't realize where the faults are in the data until they start seeing it. And so, like, yes, we saw 50 of these cases, but last year we saw 60 of these cases. Or right, like, as the data people, you're often seeing the data more. The hard part will be that they'll come to you then and say, all right, well, why did we see 10 fewer people this year? And that's a program decision. That's not a data decision. Like, that's someone else's job to answer. But it at least gets the conversation moving.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, and I think this is kind of the stock answer that everyone gives, but because it's true, like, anytime that you can save people time, so I'll get a lot of people that work on grants and be like, okay, I just spent like 7 hours like manually correlating these things. I'm like, okay, well, next time, this is your report, and it's already there. That, you know, it's not a fun conversation in the moment, because people are like, why didn't I just do all this work? It's like, well, you didn't have to, and now you don't have to.
So backing up just a little bit here, you're showing us everything with Power BI. Do you know if this is translatable into a different product like Tableau? Does Tableau have something similar to Power BI?
I mean, it is a very similar program. I haven't worked with it, but I don't know as far as like integrating with Legal Server. I do know that like getting the data from Legal Server into Tableau is not as straightforward. So that's the extent that I know. I don't know if anyone else on the call has more experience.
Okay, just curious. I'm exploring.
Yeah, Tableau, like, they don't have that web connector, and so you have to like script a connector to get data from places into Tableau. And there's different organizations that have done it, including like having done it with Legal Server, but I haven't. And yeah, this is free for us because we're already paying for it, so we're using this.
Like, the nice thing on the back end of Legal Server is that that reports API can become the source for Power BI, right? I know we had someone talk, I think Leah talked about Click Data last year. We've seen other people use it for, I want to say someone used it with Tableau. I don't remember which organization. But any of these sort of visualizations where you can say, use an API call with an XML data set as my source, right? You can make that connection directly so that it's pulling from there. Some of those visualizations will need, like, some of those programs don't let you do like live responses. You have to do them every 12 hours. Certainly from Legal Server, we prefer that you don't make those API calls every time you load the report, but that you schedule it once or twice a day or something like that. I know we've internally been looking at integrating with Google Data Studio as well as another one of these visualizations, and just places where we can pull this data into different ways, right? We can see how things came about, right? And then most of these visualization platforms have a maps feature, have a bar graph, and like all the different graph types, right? Like, those are all there because they expect you to see this in different ways. So, any other questions for Susan?
On the licensing, sorry if I missed this. Do we know if to view one of these reports on the browser, does the user need a pro license, like what's included with E5, or just like a regular Power BI license, can they view it?
I don't know. I know they can view it with E5, but I have not looked at what the kind of next step down would be.
Okay.
The pro licenses do work to view published reports that come from a person with another pro license, at least. It's actually non-intuitive and kind of weird how their licensing scheme works, and it depends both on the license of the viewer and the license of the person with the sort of account who can view what, where, created by whom. It seems almost intentionally confusing.
Yeah, I keep getting redirected to like help sites like this will explain everything, and then I read it and like this explains nothing. I don't understand.
And when a data set, I guess a column comes in as a table, how are you able to convert that?
So for me, what I always do is I click on the kind of column header, and then just say expand and do that for each column. There's probably a way to say do this for all columns, but yeah. If you get a report that you're working with, go ahead.
I think somebody was talking about this in the site admins listserv recently, and they, I'm sorry, you were probably on this call and I forgot who it was. It was caused by like Power BI not reading nulls correctly. So like maybe if you're able to replace null values with something within legal server, perhaps that would, this is speculation on my part, I haven't done it, perhaps that would avoid that problem of the values coming in as tables.
Yeah, that was me who said that, actually.
I was just like,
it seems like any column where a null is possible, or that a null value occurs in the data, then it will import it as a table. And like Susan said, you can just say expand that column. And then I also posted to the list another way of getting around it, but by adding a column and having a bit of code that determines what that column does, that looks at the column in question and either translates the existing value or substitutes another value for nulls. So you could fill in nulls with some other descriptive value if you wanted to, and then you just use that newly created column. So
Cool, thank you.
All right. Well, unless there's other questions on this, I'm going to stop the recording.